If my soul is the price, then take it. The words left Rosalie Hartwell's lips before fear could stop them, and for a moment, the entire hall fell silent. The old stone chamber seemed to hold its breath. Even the flames dancing inside the iron lanterns along the walls flickered lower, as if they too were listening. Rosalie stood alone at the center of the council floor, her hands trembling despite every effort to appear strong. Outside, winter winds rattled the windows of the Silver Creek pack house. Snow had been falling for nearly 3 months. It covered the forests, buried the hunting trails, and turned once fertile land into a frozen wasteland. The pack was dying. Everyone knew it. 42 families remained. 42 families who had once laughed together during harvest festivals and gathered around bonfires beneath summer stars. Now they survived on dwindling supplies and fading hope. Children went to sleep hungry. Hunters returned with empty hands. Elders whispered about abandoning the territory their ancestors had protected for generations. Rosalie had spent her entire life being told she wasn't important enough to change anything. She was an Omega, quiet, gentle, easy to overlook, the kind of girl people thanked politely before forgetting she was standing there. Yet tonight, every eye in the room was fixed on her. Elder Miriam sat near the council table, her silver hair glowing in the lantern light. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Rosalie," she whispered, her voice fragile. "You don't have to do this." But they both knew that wasn't true. Lord Varric Ashford stood across the chamber, dressed in black royal attire, the silver crest of the crown shining on his chest. He looked perfectly composed while delivering a sentence that would change Rosalie's life forever. "The agreement remains unchanged," he said calmly. "The debt of Silver Creek will be forgiven. The pack will be protected under royal decree. Food, medicine, and supplies will arrive before the next snowfall." His gaze settled on Rosalie. In exchange, the chosen Omega offers herself to the king. A chill moved through the room. Nobody spoke. Nobody challenged him. Because everyone knew who the king was. Lucian Blackthorn. The cursed king. The ruler hidden behind the walls of Blackthorn Citadel. The man whose name was spoken in lowered voices across every territory. Stories followed him like shadows. Some claimed darkness itself obeyed his commands. Others said a terrible curse consumed him little by little each year. Many believed he was no longer entirely human. What everyone agreed on was simple. No one wanted to go near him. Rosalie swallowed hard. Fear twisted inside her chest. She wasn't brave. She wished she were. Brave people charged into danger without hesitation. Brave people didn't feel their knees shaking. Brave people didn't secretly wish someone else would stand up and volunteer. But nobody had volunteered. Because nobody else could save the pack. Lord Varric stepped forward carrying a small wooden box. When he opened it, a silver blade rested inside beside a parchment covered in ancient symbols. The contract. Rosalie stared at it. This was the moment. Once signed, there would be no turning back. Her future would belong to the crown, to the king, to the curse waiting beyond the mountains. The memory of hungry children flashed through her mind. She remembered little Emma crying because there wasn't enough bread. She remembered old Mr. Dawson pretending he wasn't sick so the medicine could be given to someone younger. She remembered the exhausted faces of hunters returning from empty forests. The choice suddenly felt simple. Not easy, never easy, but simple. Rosalie stepped forward. The stone floor felt cold beneath her boots. Lord Varric offered the blade. For a second, she hesitated. Then she took it. A faint murmur spread through the crowd. Nobody expected the overlooked Omega to walk so steadily toward her fate. Rosalie pressed her thumb against the edge and placed her hand over the parchment. The symbols immediately began to glow with pale silver light. A strange warmth rushed through her skin. The room darkened around the edges. She could hear her heartbeat pounding inside her ears. Once, twice, 3 times. Then she wrote her name. Rosalie Hartwell. The final letter had barely touched the page when a burning sensation exploded across her wrist. She gasped and stumbled backward. The parchment burst with silver light. Elder Miriam cried out. Several council members jumped to their feet. Rosalie looked down. A mark had appeared beneath her skin. Delicate black lines twisted around her wrist like living ink, forming an unfamiliar symbol. The room fell silent again. Lord Varric stared at the mark with an expression she couldn't read. Then, for the first time that night, he looked genuinely surprised. Far beyond the frozen forests, beyond the mountains, beyond the kingdom's borders, a man sitting alone inside the highest tower of Blackthorn's citadel suddenly opened his eyes. The journey began before sunrise. Snow drifted across the frozen road as Rosalie sat inside the royal carriage, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. The silver mark around her wrist remained hidden beneath her sleeve, but she could still feel it. Every few minutes, a faint warmth pulsed beneath her skin, reminding her that the contract was real, reminding her that there was no turning back. Outside the window, Silver Creek slowly disappeared behind a curtain of white. The familiar cabins, the narrow trails through the woods, the smoke rising from chimneys all faded into the distance. Rosalie watched until she could not see them anymore. A strange ache settled inside her chest. She had spent her entire life wishing people would notice her. Now she was leaving everything she had ever known. Lord Varric rode across from her in silence for most of the trip. His expression remained unreadable, as though emotions were something he had learned to live without years ago. By late afternoon, the mountains appeared on the horizon. Towering walls of gray stone stretched toward the clouds. Rosalie had never traveled this far from home. The sight made her feel smaller than ever. As darkness approached, the carriage climbed a winding road carved into the mountainside. Then she saw it. Blackthorn Citadel. The fortress rose from the cliffs like something pulled from an old legend. Massive towers pierced the evening sky. Thousands of lanterns glowed along the walls, casting golden light across black stone. It should have looked beautiful. Instead, it felt lonely. Rosalie could not explain why. The closer they came, the heavier the air seemed to become. Even the horses slowed their pace. Guards stood at every gate, their silver armor reflecting the torchlight. Nobody smiled. Nobody spoke above a whisper. It was as though the entire castle lived beneath an invisible shadow. The carriage finally stopped inside a vast courtyard. Snowflakes drifted through the cold air as servants hurried forward. Rosalie stepped down carefully. The moment her boots touched the ground, she felt it again. The mark on her wrist burned. Not painfully, just enough to steal her breath. Her eyes widened. The sensation was stronger now, stronger than it had ever been. A young servant noticed her reaction and immediately looked away. Fear flashed across the girl's face. Rosalie frowned. "What is it?" she asked gently. The servant hesitated. "You felt it too?" Rosalie stared at her. "Felt what?" The girl's face turned pale. Before she could answer, another servant quickly pulled her away. Neither looked back. A chill ran down Rosalie's spine. She followed Lord Varric into the castle. The hall seemed endless. Black marble floors reflected the lantern light overhead. Ancient portraits lined the walls. Kings, queens, warriors. Every face appeared serious. Every gaze seemed to follow her as she walked past. Eventually, they reached a grand staircase. At its base stood a man with broad shoulders and calm gray eyes. Beta Rowan Hale, Lord Varric introduced. Captain of the Royal Guard. Rowan bowed respectfully. Unlike everyone else, there was kindness in his expression. "Welcome to Blackthorn Citadel, Miss Hartwell." Rosalie managed a small smile. "Thank you." Rowan hesitated. "There is something you should know." Lord Varric immediately stiffened. "That will not be necessary." Rowan ignored him. His gaze remained on Rosalie. "Most people here have never seen His Majesty." Rosalie blinked. "Never." Rowan shook his head. "Not for years." The corridor suddenly felt colder. "Why?" she asked quietly. Neither man answered immediately. Somewhere deep within the castle, a distant sound echoed through the stone walls. It was not loud, not threatening. Yet every servant nearby immediately froze. Rowan's jaw tightened. Lord Varric looked away. Rosalie felt the mark on her wrist flare with heat. Then Rowan finally spoke. "Because whatever is happening to the king is getting worse." At that exact moment, somewhere high above the castle, behind a locked door hidden within the tallest tower, a pair of silver eyes slowly opened in the darkness. Rosalie barely slept that night. The room prepared for her was larger than the entire cabin she had grown up in, yet it felt strangely empty. A fire crackled inside a stone fireplace. Heavy curtains framed tall windows overlooking the snow-covered mountains. Everything was elegant. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. She stood near the window long after midnight, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. Somewhere inside this enormous fortress lived the man she had crossed a kingdom to meet. The king whose existence seemed to weigh on every soul beneath this roof. The king nobody wanted to talk about. The silver mark around her wrist pulsed again. Rosalie pressed her fingers against it. Warm. Alive. Connected to something she could not see. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Before she could answer, the door opened and Beta Rowan stepped inside carrying a tray with tea and fresh bread. "I thought you might still be awake," he said. Rosalie offered a grateful smile. Thank you. Rowan set the tray down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rosalie finally asked the question that had followed her since arriving. What happened to him? Rowan's expression darkened. He stared into the fire for several seconds before answering. Nobody knows the full truth anymore. Rosalie sat across from him. But you know something. Rowan exhaled slowly. I know the man he used to be. His gaze remained fixed on the flames. 12 years ago, before the curse, there was a winter worse than this one. Entire villages were starving. Roads vanished beneath blizzards. Most rulers stayed behind castle walls. A faint smile touched his lips. Lucien didn't. I rode beside him for 2 days through a snowstorm to deliver grain to a village that wasn't even part of his territory. When we arrived, a child was dying from the cold. The king carried that boy through waist-deep snow himself. The smile disappeared. That was the kind of man he was. Rosalie listened quietly. The image felt impossible to reconcile with the monster from the stories. Then what changed? Rowan's jaw tightened. One night, he disappeared. 3 days later, he came back. The fire crackled softly between them. The curse had already begun. What kind of curse? Rosalie asked. Rowan shook his head. No healer has ever explained it. Every year it grows worse. Every year he becomes more isolated. A sadness entered his voice. Most people eventually gave up on him. Rosalie lowered her eyes. But he didn't give up on himself. Rowan looked at her with something close to surprise before nodding. No, he never did. Long after Rowan left, those words remained with her. The next morning, snow drifted gently across the castle grounds. Rosalie was exploring one of the upper corridors when she noticed something unusual. A section of the hallway had been abandoned. Dust covered the floor. Several lanterns remained unlit. Yet she could feel warmth ahead. Not from fire. From the mark. Every step made the sensation stronger. Rosalie slowed. Her heart began to pound. She knew she should turn around. Instead, she continued forward. The corridor narrowed. The warmth beneath her skin intensified. Then came something else. A strange pressure inside her chest. Not pain. Not fear. Exhaustion. Deep, bone-weary exhaustion that did not belong to her. Rosalie stopped walking. For a moment she pressed a hand against the wall. The feeling vanished almost immediately, leaving her breathless. The mark pulsed again. Stronger. Calling her forward. She continued. Somewhere ahead, she thought she heard a dull sound echo through the stone. Not a growl. Not a roar. Something heavier. As though someone had struck a wall and then fallen silent. The corridor eventually ended at a massive black door reinforced with silver bands. The instant Rosalie saw it, the mark flared with heat. Her breath caught. This was it. Somehow she knew. This was where he was. The king. She stepped closer. The warmth surged so intensely that she could feel her pulse inside her wrist. Then a voice came from the other side of the door. Deep. Calm. Tired. Who was there? Rosalie froze. Her pulse raced. She had imagined meeting him 100 different ways. None of them had prepared her for this. Silence stretched between them. Then she found her voice. My name is Rosalie Hartwell. Nothing happened. No movement. No sound. For several seconds, she wondered if he had left. Then his voice came again, lower this time. You should not be here. Rosalie swallowed. I did not mean to intrude. Another pause followed. Through the bond, she felt it again. That same exhaustion. Not anger. Not cruelty. Just someone carrying a burden for far too long. Go back to your room, he said quietly. This place is not safe for you. The words should have frightened her. Instead, they made her chest tighten. He did not sound dangerous. He sounded lonely. Before she could answer, footsteps echoed from the corridor behind her. Guards were approaching. The warmth vanished immediately. Rosalie looked back toward the black door. Will I see you again? She asked softly. Silence. Then, just as the guards rounded the corner, his voice reached her one final time. Rosalie. Her heart skipped. It was the first time he had spoken her name. The next time we meet, Lucien said from behind the door, do not come looking for me. Rosalie tried to follow his instruction. For 3 days, she avoided the abandoned corridor. She attended meals with the castle staff, explored the lower gardens buried beneath fresh snow, and spent hours helping elderly servants organize supplies for the coming winter. The servants seemed surprised by her willingness to help, but their caution gradually softened around her. Yet no matter how busy she kept herself, the strange connection refused to disappear. The silver mark around her wrist had changed. It no longer pulsed without reason. Sometimes it remained silent for hours. Other times a faint warmth appeared unexpectedly beneath her skin, lingering only long enough to remind her of the voice behind the black door. By the fourth evening, Rosalie sat alone, beside a library window overlooking the mountains. Snow drifted through the darkness beyond the glass. A thick book rested open in her lap, but she had not turned a page in nearly an hour. Her thoughts kept returning to Lucian Blackthorn, not the monster from the stories, not the cursed king hidden inside the tower, the man whose voice had sounded tired rather than cruel, the man who had warned her to stay away. A sudden ache flared beneath the silver mark. Rosalie gasped softly. The book slipped from her lap and landed on the floor. Heat spread across her wrist. Not painful, not burning, just enough to make her heart race. Then a strange heaviness settled over her chest. It lasted only a moment, a fleeting sensation she could not explain, as though somewhere inside the castle, someone was carrying a burden too heavy to bear alone. The feeling vanished almost immediately. Rosalie stared down at the mark, unsettled by how real it had felt. Miss Hartwell. She looked up. Beta Rowan stood several feet away, concern visible on his face. Are you all right? Rosalie hesitated. I don't know. Rowan stepped closer. What happened? She glanced at the mark. For a moment, I felt something. Rowan's eyes lowered to her wrist. Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled softly inside the library hearth. Finally, Rosalie spoke again. Do you think the contract is causing this? Rowan remained thoughtful for several seconds before answering. I've heard stories about bonds created by old magic. Rosalie frowned. Stories. A faint shadow crossed his expression. Nothing more. His answer only deepened her curiosity. Rowan looked toward the tall windows. Come with me. A short time later, they stood on a balcony overlooking the northern side of the fortress. Wind swept across the stone railings. Far above them, one tower rose higher than every other structure in the kingdom. Rosalie recognized it immediately. The tower. The highest chamber remained dark except for a single lantern glowing behind one distant window. Rowan folded his arms against the cold. The king has not left those rooms in months. Rosalie stared at the light. Something about the sight made her chest tighten. Not from sympathy. Not yet. More from uncertainty. The stories described a monster. But every piece of evidence she had encountered suggested something far more complicated. Why does everyone seem so afraid of him? She asked quietly. Rowan followed her gaze toward the tower. Fear is often easier than understanding. Before Rosalie could respond, the mark on her wrist pulsed again. Once, then twice. Stronger than before. She froze. Hundreds of feet away, beyond stone walls and locked doors, inside the highest chamber of Blackthorn Citadel, Lucian Blackthorn suddenly rose from his chair and turned toward the window. For several long seconds, he stood perfectly still, as though he had sensed something in return. The connection changed everything after that night. Rosalie could no longer convince herself that the strange bond existed only in her imagination. Every day brought small reminders that something unusual existed between her and the king. Sometimes she would be arranging books in the library when a faint warmth spread through the silver mark on her wrist. Other times, she would be helping servants prepare meals when a strange heaviness settled over her thoughts for only a few seconds before disappearing again. The sensations never lasted long. They revealed nothing clearly, yet they felt real enough to leave her unsettled. At first, she told no one, not even Rowan. There was something deeply personal about the connection, something she could not explain. It felt less like magic and more like standing near a closed door and occasionally hearing sounds from the other side. One snowy afternoon, Rosalie wandered into an older section of the castle she had never explored before. Dust covered the shelves. Forgotten portraits lined the walls. Most of the room appeared untouched for years. Curiosity led her deeper inside until she discovered a collection of journals carefully preserved within a glass cabinet. The name stamped across every spine was the same. Lucian Blackthorn. Her pulse quickened. She hesitated only briefly before opening the first journal. The pages contained records from more than a decade earlier. Reports from villages. Notes. About harvests. Requests for aid. Letters from struggling families. Rosalie slowly turned the pages. The more she read, the more confused she became. This was not the man described in frightening stories. The king who wrote these entries cared about people. He remembered names. He tracked shipments of food during harsh winters. One entry described a mountain village that had lost its bridge after a violent storm. Rather than sending officials, Lucian had traveled there himself to oversee repairs. Another entry mentioned a young child suffering from a serious illness whose treatment had been quietly funded through the royal treasury. There was no praise attached to the act. No recognition. Only a short note confirming the payment had been delivered. Rosalie stared at the neat handwriting. Careful. Thoughtful. Human. Who were you? She whispered softly. A voice answered from behind her. The same man he has always been. Rosalie turned. Princess Celine Blackthorne stood in the doorway. She was younger than Rosalie expected, with dark hair and silver eyes that immediately reminded her of her brother. Celine stepped into the room and glanced at the journals. Most people prefer the stories, she said quietly. Stories are easier. Rosalie looked back down at the open page. These do not sound like the actions of a monster. A faint sadness touched Celine's expression. No. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Snow drifted outside the tall windows. The room felt suspended between past and present. Rosalie lowered her gaze to another entry. More villages. More names. More people helped by a king the world seemed determined to fear. The contradiction unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Then the silver mark beneath her sleeve pulsed softly. Once. Then again. A familiar warmth spread through her wrist before fading almost immediately. Rosalie instinctively glanced toward the distant tower visible through the snowy glass. Celine noticed the movement. Her eyes briefly lingered on Rosalie's sleeve before something unreadable crossed her face. But she said nothing. The silence stretched. Rosalie returned her attention to the journal, though her thoughts remained elsewhere. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Citadel, she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew. Perhaps the stories were incomplete. Perhaps the rumors had buried something important. Perhaps the man hidden inside the tower was not the monster everyone feared. The realization was small, fragile, unfinished, but it refused to leave her. Far above the castle, inside a chamber hidden behind stone walls and locked doors, Lucien Blackthorn slowly lowered the book resting in his hands. A strange feeling had disturbed his concentration for only a moment. It vanished before he could understand it. Yet for the first time in many years, he found himself staring toward the snow-covered horizon, wondering why the silence around him no longer felt quite as empty as before. The next week passed beneath endless snowfall. White covered the mountains, the castle walls, and every path leading into the valley below. Yet inside Blackthorn Citadel, something was changing. Rosalie felt it every day. The bond between her and Lucien continued to strengthen in ways neither of them understood. Some mornings, she woke before sunrise with a strange certainty that he was already awake somewhere above the fortress. Other times, she would be reading beside a fireplace when an unexpected sense of calm settled over her for no reason at all. Whenever it happened, the silver mark around her wrist glowed softly beneath her sleeve. The sensations never lasted long, but they were becoming harder to ignore. One evening, while helping Princess Celine organize old royal records, Rosalie discovered a collection of sealed documents hidden behind a false panel in a cabinet. The papers were old, covered in dust, and marked with royal seals from 12 years earlier. Curiosity made her pause. "What are these?" she asked. Celine glanced at the documents and frowned. "I didn't know those were still here." Rosalie carefully opened the top file. Inside were reports describing the days before Lucien disappeared. Her eyes moved across pages filled with meetings, travel arrangements, diplomatic visits, and correspondence. Everything appeared ordinary until she noticed a particular name appearing again and again. Duke Alaric Thornwell. "Who is this?" she asked. Celine's expression grew thoughtful. "My father's closest advisor." Rosalie continued reading. The name appeared throughout the records. Meetings attended by Alaric. Recommendations offered by Alaric. Reports copied to Alaric. Nothing seemed unusual by itself. Yet the frequency caught her attention. "Where is he now?" Rosalie asked quietly. Celine looked away. "No one really knows. He disappeared not long after the curse began." The answer lingered in Rosalie's thoughts. Not because it proved anything, but because the timing troubled her. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps it wasn't. She wasn't sure. Later that night, long after the castle had fallen silent, Rosalie sat alone in her room reviewing the documents once more. Snow drifted against the windows. Firelight flickered across the walls. The more she read, the more questions seemed to replace answers. 12 years ago, Lucien vanished. 3 days later, he returned changed. Somewhere between those events, the truth had been lost. A sudden warmth spread across her wrist. Rosalie looked down immediately. The silver mark glowed softly. This time there were no images. No visions. Only a feeling. Unease. Faint but unmistakable. It lasted only a few seconds before fading away, leaving her unsettled. She pressed a hand against the mark. Somehow she knew the feeling had not come from her. Before she could think further, a knock sounded at the door. Rowan entered moments later. His expression was unusually serious. "I have been looking for you." Rosalie stood at once. "What happened?" Rowan hesitated before answering. "A messenger arrived from the capital." Her stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" Rowan glanced toward the documents spread across the desk. Lord Varric received orders directly from the Royal Council. The room suddenly felt colder. "What kind of orders?" she asked. Rowan's jaw tightened. "They want you transferred to the capital immediately." Rosalie stared at him. "Why?" For several seconds, Rowan said nothing. Then he shook his head. "I don't know." His expression darkened. "But I don't trust it." Silence settled between them. Snow continued falling beyond the windows. Somewhere deep inside, Rosalie felt the same unease stirring again. Not fear exactly. A warning. As though events already set in motion were beginning to close around her. Far above them, inside the highest tower of Blackthorn's citadel, Lucian Blackthorn suddenly lowered the book resting in his hands. The silver mark on his own wrist had begun to glow. For 12 years it had remained silent. Now it pulsed steadily beneath his skin. Lucian stared at it in stunned silence. Then, for the first time in a very long time, he rose from his chair and walked toward the door. The bell continued to echo through Blackthorn's citadel long after the final chime faded into silence. Rosalie stood frozen beside Rowan, her pulse racing as servants hurried through the corridors outside. Everywhere she looked, people seemed stunned. Some whispered prayers. Others stared toward the upper levels of the fortress as though they could hardly believe what was happening. "What does it mean?" Rosalie asked. Rowan kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling above them. "The king has left the tower." For a moment, Rosalie forgot how to breathe. She had spent weeks hearing stories about Lucian Blackthorn. She had spoken to him through a locked door. She had read his journals and questioned every rumor surrounding him. Yet she had never actually seen him. Not once. Outside, snow lashed against the castle windows while wind howled across the mountains. Inside, anticipation spread through the fortress like wildfire. "Where is he going?" Rosalie asked quietly. Rowan shook his head. "No one knows." Before either of them could say more, another guard appeared in the doorway. His face was pale. "Captain." Rowan turned immediately. "What is it?" "The council representatives have arrived." The room fell silent. Rowan's expression hardened. "Already." The guard nodded. "They brought soldiers." A chill moved through Rosalie. Everything was happening too quickly. The transfer order. The messenger. The growing tension inside the castle. Now soldiers from the capital. Rowan muttered a curse under his breath. "Stay here," he said. "I'm not leaving you alone." Rosalie surprised herself with her answer. "Then I'm coming with you." Rowan stared at her for a moment before giving a reluctant nod. Together they moved through the fortress. The closer they came to the central hall, the louder the voices became. Arguments echoed through the stone corridors. Tension hung in the air like an approaching storm. When they finally reached the grand hall, dozens of people had already gathered. Guards lined the walls. Servants watched nervously from the edges of the room. At the center stood 3 officials wearing the colors of the Royal Council. One of them held a sealed document. By authority of the council, the official announced, "Rosalie Hartwell is to be transferred immediately." Murmurs spread through the hall. Rosalie felt every eye turn toward her. "On what grounds?" Rowan demanded. "That information is restricted." "Convenient," Rowan replied coldly. The official ignored him. "The Omega will come with us now." 2 soldiers stepped forward. Rosalie's stomach tightened. The silver mark on her wrist suddenly grew warm beneath her sleeve. Once, then again, stronger than ever before. The hall doors opened. The sound echoed through the chamber. Every voice stopped. Every movement ceased. Rosalie turned. For a moment, nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. A tall figure stood in the doorway. Dark clothing, broad shoulders, silver eyes reflecting the torchlight. Yet he was nothing like the monster from the stories. Nor was he the flawless king she had imagined during countless sleepless nights. His face was pale. Shadows darkened the skin beneath his eyes. One hand remained clenched at his side, as though he was forcing himself to remain standing. The simple act of leaving the tower seemed to have cost him more than anyone in the room understood. Rosalie felt something tighten painfully inside her chest. The voice behind the locked door. The careful handwriting in the journals. The lonely man hidden from the world. Suddenly, they were all the same person. Real. Human. Standing only a few feet away. For weeks, she had searched for the truth about Lucian Blackthorn. Now she realized the truth had never been power or fear. It had been loneliness. The council officials went pale. Several guards lowered their heads immediately. Even Lord Varric straightened. No one dared speak. Lucien's gaze moved slowly across the hall. It passed over the soldiers, the officials, the gathered crowd. Then it stopped on Rosalie. The bond ignited. Warmth surged through her wrist. Across the room, Lucien's eyes narrowed slightly. For the briefest moment, his attention dropped to her sleeve, then to his own hand. Recognition flickered across his face. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition. The silence stretched between them. For the first time, there was no locked door, no distance, no shadows separating them, only understanding. Finally, one of the council officials found his voice. Your Majesty, we were just, no. The single word cut through the hall like steel. The official immediately fell silent. Lucien never looked away from Rosalie. She stays. The room froze. No arguments followed. No explanations were offered. None were needed. Because for the first time in months, the king had left his isolation. And for the first time in 12 years, he had chosen to stand between someone vulnerable and the people trying to take her away. The fortress felt different after the king returned. Nobody said it aloud, yet everyone sensed the change. Servants no longer whispered quite as freely. Guards stood straighter. Even the endless snowfall outside seemed quieter somehow. Rosalie felt it most of all. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Citadel, Lucien Blackthorn was no longer a distant voice hidden behind locked doors. He was real. The memory of silver eyes meeting hers in the great hall refused to leave her thoughts. 2 days passed before she saw him again. The invitation arrived shortly after sunset. No royal seal. No formal language. Only a brief message delivered by Rowan. The king wishes to speak with you. Rosalie's pulse immediately quickened. Rowan escorted her through silent corridors and up a winding staircase she had never climbed before. Eventually, they stopped outside a private chamber overlooking the northern mountains. Rowan opened the door and stepped aside. He is waiting. Rosalie entered alone. Lucien stood near the window with his back to her. Snow drifted beyond the glass. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he turned. Up close, the signs of the curse were impossible to miss. Shadows lingered beneath his eyes. His face was pale. There was a weariness about him that no crown could hide. Yet his gaze remained steady, calm, watchful. You should have left with the council. His voice was exactly as she remembered. Rosalie frowned. You are the first person who has told me to leave. Then perhaps you should listen. Something in his expression tightened. The longer you remain here, the greater the danger becomes. Rosalie studied him carefully. Danger from whom? Lucien looked away toward the snow-covered mountains. That is not important. It is important if it concerns me. Silence stretched between them. The bond remained quiet. Yet Rosalie could feel the distance he was trying to create. Not because he disliked her, because he was afraid. The realization settled heavily in her chest. You left the tower because of me. Lucien's jaw tightened. He offered no answer. Rosalie took a step forward. The council wants me gone. Still no response. And you stopped them. Finally, Lucien looked at her. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered behind the walls he had spent years building. Then it vanished. You do not understand what is happening. Then explain it to me. Another silence followed. Longer this time. Lucien's gaze dropped briefly toward the silver mark hidden beneath her sleeve. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. 12 years ago, I believed I could protect everyone. Rosalie waited. I was wrong. The words carried more weight than any confession. Regret. Failure. Loss. 12 years of it. Lucien turned away again. Everything connected to this curse ends in suffering. Rosalie stared at him. The lonely king from the journals. The weary man standing before her now. They were the same person. For the first time, she understood why he had hidden himself from the world. Not because he feared others. Because he feared what would happen to them. I found records about the curse. She said quietly. Lucien froze. The room suddenly felt colder. What records? Rosalie swallowed. Enough to know that it was never meant to destroy you. He said nothing. It was meant to keep you alive. The silence that followed felt endless. Outside, snow struck the window pane. Lucien slowly closed his eyes. The reaction alone told her everything. So it's true. When he opened his eyes again, there was no denial. Only exhaustion. Yes. Rosalie felt her heart sink. If the curse is broken, she could not finish the sentence. Lucien did it for her. I died. The words hung between them like a blade. Neither moved. Neither looked away. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Citadel, Rosalie understood the full weight of the burden he had carried alone for 12 years. The curse was not a prison. It was life support. Destroying it would save his soul and take his life in the same breath. "That is why you wanted me to leave," she whispered. Lucien said nothing. He did not need to. Rosalie looked at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No." Surprise flickered across his face. "No, I am not leaving." Lucien stared at her. "Rosalie, everyone else already gave up on you." Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. "I won't." For several moments, neither of them spoke. The storm continued to batter the windows while silence settled over the chamber. Then a sharp knock sounded at the door. Rowan entered without waiting for permission. His expression immediately told them something was wrong. "Your Majesty." Lucien straightened. "What is it?" Rowan held a weathered leather journal in his hands. Snow clung to his cloak. The archivist found this hidden inside the old royal records. Rosalie frowned. "Another journal?" Rowan nodded. "One that belonged to the former king." Lucien's expression darkened. Rowan opened the journal carefully and revealed a folded map tucked between its pages. Time had faded the ink, but one location remained clearly marked deep within the northern mountains. Beside it, a single note had been written in hurried handwriting. "Moonfall Ridge, the final safeguard." Rosalie felt the silver mark on her wrist stir. Instantly, warmth spread beneath her skin. Lucien noticed it at the same moment. His own hand tightened. The bond pulsed between them with unusual intensity. Rowan looked from one to the other. "There is more." He turned several pages and pointed toward a damaged entry. Much of the writing had been destroyed, but a few lines remained readable. "Hidden truths survive where the curse began. Trust no order from the council. Seek the ridge before the shadow returns." The room fell silent. Rosalie exchanged a glance with Lucien. Something about the words felt important. Urgent, as though 12 years of unanswered questions were suddenly pointing toward a single destination. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Lucien lowered his gaze to the map. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he folded the map carefully and looked toward Rowan. "Prepare horses." Rowan blinked. Tonight. Rosalie felt the warmth of the bond flare again. Whatever waited at Moonfall Ridge had already begun pulling all of them toward it. None of them knew that the journey would uncover the final truth about the curse, or that it would force each of them to make a choice that would change the kingdom forever. And for the first time in 12 years, Lucien Blackthorn found himself unable to tell her to go. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Dawn light filtered through the ruined chamber while snow drifted silently beyond the broken stone walls. Rosalie stared at the ancient page in her hands. A willing soul may assume the burden. One life exchanged for another. One heart carrying what the other can no longer bear. Across from her, Lucien's expression hardened instantly. "No." The answer came before she could speak, before she could even breathe. "Lucien, no." He crossed the chamber in seconds and took the page from her hands. For the first time since she had known him, there was anger in his voice. Not at her, at the choice itself. "I won't allow it." The bond surged between them. Fear flooded through it. Raw, unfiltered. Not fear of death, fear of losing her. Rosalie looked up at him. "You've been carrying this alone for 12 years. And I will carry it 12 more if I have to." The words echoed through the chamber. Nobody spoke. Even Rowan remained silent. Lucien's eyes never left hers. "I spent years accepting this fate. You don't get to throw your life away because of me." Something tightened painfully inside Rosalie's chest. Before she could answer, Rowan stepped forward and frowned at the page. "Wait." Everyone turned. Rowan carefully examined the parchment. Then he looked toward Celine. "This isn't complete." Together they searched the remaining documents scattered across the chamber. Finally, hidden between the pages of an old journal, Celine found a torn fragment. Her hands trembled as she matched it to the original text. The missing words appeared. Rosalie read them aloud. "The burden may be divided among willing hearts. What is carried together shall not consume one alone." Silence followed. Lucien stared at the page. So did Rowan. For 12 years, everyone had believed the curse demanded sacrifice. Yet the truth had been hidden from the beginning. Not sacrifice. Choice. Not loss. Trust. A slow clap echoed from the entrance of the ruins. The sound sent a chill through the chamber. A tall figure stepped from the shadows. Silver hair. Cold eyes. A smile devoid of warmth. Duke Alaric Thornwell. "Remarkable," he said softly. "After all these years, you finally found the piece I removed." Rowan immediately drew his sword. Guards moved forward. Alaric barely acknowledged them. His attention remained fixed on Lucien. Do you know why I hid it? Nobody answered. The old duke smiled. Because kingdoms do not survive on kindness. His gaze swept toward Rosalie. Your father believed people would follow a good king. Then he looked back at Lucien. I knew better. People follow fear. Fear obeys. Fear can be controlled. Something dark flashed through Lucien's eyes. You cursed an innocent man. I preserved the kingdom. Alaric's voice sharpened. You were weak. Just like your father. Always protecting everyone. Always sacrificing for everyone. Kings like that are easily broken. The chamber fell silent. Then Lucien took a single step forward. No. Alaric frowned. Lucien's voice remained calm. Steady. Certain. Kings who stand alone are easily broken. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Alaric's face. Rowan gave the signal. Guards closed around the old duke. This time, there was nowhere left for him to run. As he was led away, his confidence finally cracked. The man who had spent 12 years manipulating fear disappeared into the falling snow. Silence returned. Rosalie looked toward Lucien. He was still staring at the ritual page, still trying to carry the burden alone. Lucien. He closed his eyes. Don't ask this of me. The vulnerability in his voice hurt more than any shout could have. Rosalie stepped closer. I'm not asking to carry it for you. His eyes opened. Then what are you asking? Tears filled hers. Stop carrying it alone. For a moment, neither moved. Neither spoke. The bond pulsed softly between them. Not demanding. Not forcing. Waiting. Lucien looked at her for a very long time. Then, slowly, the walls he had built over 12 years finally began to break. He nodded once. The ritual began at sunrise. Rosalie and Lucien stood opposite one another within the ancient circle, while Rowan and Celine completed the final markings. Silver light spread across the stone floor. The marks on their wrists blazed. Pain came first, then memories. Years of loneliness. Years of fear. Years of sacrifice. Rosalie felt the crushing weight that had haunted Lucien for 12 years. Lucien felt the quiet strength that had carried Rosalie through a lifetime of rejection. Neither tried to take everything. Neither tried to protect the other from the truth. Together, they carried what neither could survive alone. The curse shattered. Light exploded across the mountains. Wind rushed through the ruins. Then everything became still. Rosalie opened her eyes. The burden was gone. Across from her, Lucien remained standing. Alive. Breathing. Free. For several seconds, neither moved. Then something unexpected happened. Lucien lifted his face toward the morning sun. The light touched his skin. He closed his eyes. A faint breeze moved through the chamber. No pain followed. No darkness. No voices. Nothing. Only silence. Peaceful silence. The kind he had not known in 12 years. When he opened his eyes again, tears stood in them. Not from grief. Relief. Rosalie smiled. Lucien laughed softly, almost disbelievingly. Then she laughed too. Weeks later, the truth spread across the kingdom. Duke Alaric's crimes were exposed. The royal council publicly cleared Lucien's name. Villages celebrated. Bells rang across every territory. Yet none of that mattered as much as the first day of spring. Thousands gathered before Blackthorn Citadel. Snow had finally vanished from the valley. Sunlight bathed the mountains in gold. Rosalie stood before the crowd wearing a simple silver gown. Beside her stood a king who no longer hid from the world. Lucien Blackthorn stepped forward and lowered himself to one knee. Silence swept through the courtyard. His silver eyes never left hers. You saw the truth when everyone else chose fear, he said quietly. Emotion caught briefly in his voice. And when I believed strength meant carrying everything alone, you reminded me that it never did. Tears filled Rosalie's eyes. Lucien gently took her hand. You gave me back my future. A warm spring breeze crossed the courtyard. Then the king smiled. Not the smile of a ruler. The smile of a man who had finally come home. Rosalie Hartwell, will you allow me the honor of spending the rest of my life beside you? Through tears, Rosalie laughed softly. Yes. The crowd erupted into cheers. Above them, sunlight broke through the clouds. And after years of loneliness, sacrifice, and fear, two people who had changed each other's lives finally chose the same future. Together.